Hey, welcome. My name is Rachel Smith, and this is the Natural Health Rising podcast. I am a certified functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner and the owner of Natural Health Rising, which is my online holistic functional medicine company where I help people who have autoimmune diseases, chronic illnesses, mystery symptoms, and a whole host of other imbalances restore their health by natural means. On this podcast, you're going to hear conversations between myself and other health experts on functional medicine and general holistic health. My goal is to provide you with the tools you need in order to help you rise to your healthiest and happiest self.
So today's guest, Erica Ziel, is a deep core exercise specialist. Erica is the founder and creator of Core Athletica, the Core Rehab Program, Knocked Up Fitness Prenatal Membership, Instruction Trainer Course, and the host of the Core Connections podcast. She believes that anything you want to improve about your health and life, you can. So welcome to the show, Erica.
Thanks, Rachel. I'm so excited to chat with you today.
Me too. So what I always like to start with is getting into a little bit of your background and your story first. So if you want to tell us, like, how did you get into your career and if there's any significant things that happened in your life that led you here today.
Yeah. So I'll try to keep it short.
Go wherever you want.
So I always say, I kind of look at myself as like a movement detective expert, things like that, right? I love finding dysfunction in movement. Some people will laugh at that, but I'm like, no, because I had so much dysfunctional movement when I was younger and I was always in so much pain. Specifically, I started having knee pain almost daily when I was about 5. And so, of course, the doctors kept saying it's growing pains, she'll grow out of it, blah, 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 right? So finally, by the time I was 17, fully stopped growing, like by 14, right? They were still saying that. And my mom was fed up with it. I was fed up with it, obviously. I wanted to always be a good athlete, and I was decent, but I was always injured halfway through every season. So I never really got the opportunity to be a good athlete. So finally, we went to the Mayo Clinic, which is like 3 hours north of where I grew up, and saw a specialist, and they're like, oh, well, you need to strengthen your legs. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, that sounds so simple to me. I was like, it's taken me how many years for someone to tell me that? So that's what propelled me to get into the gym, start weightlifting when I was 17. I was blessed. We had a really good strength and conditioning coach at the time when I was in high school who really was big on form. So I started doing Olympic lifting and all of that, and then went on to study exercise science. And so finally, by the time I was graduating from Iowa State, I had rehabilitated my own body and started really discovering the power of movement from a healing perspective, not just to like get strong and lose weight, but truly to like help heal the body. And because I did it with myself, and I obviously was starting to do it with other people as well. And along the way, I discovered mat Pilates. And so then when I started teaching that in college, and then when I moved to Southern California to do my internship, and I ended up staying out there for about 11 years, met my husband and my 3 kiddos out there. But I dove deep into Pilates and just absolutely loved it, which was like basically getting a whole nother degree. It was so much education, and I loved it. And I always say Pilates kind of saved me because my body I just can't tolerate really high intense training for very long. Like maybe I can weave it in periodically, but I also dealt with, which ties into why I'm an FDN now. But I had cortisol problems then, I had blood sugar issues, and it wasn't necessarily like, because I was eating really junky food. It was something going on within my body. So kind of fast forward through the years, having 3 babies. And I always loved working with prenatal women. I was just fascinated even before I had my own kiddos. And I'm really grateful that I did, because through getting to work with pregnant women, as well as I worked with men, I worked with professional athletes. But the one thing it started doing was pushing me to look outside of fitness. So I started studying fascia and looking at fascial research. I started understanding the deep core, specifically like pelvic floor, which, I mean, that sounds kind of shocking. I have an exercise science degree, and we did not learn about fascia, nor did we learn about the pelvic floor in college. So these were things I had to go outside of the educational world and the fitness world to start learning and discovering and kind of connecting the dots and putting things together. And so it was just amazing to me over the years what our body really is capable of doing through movement from a healing perspective, right? So many people struggle with aches and pains. And while I know there's other things that can be going on, if we're not fixing our biomechanics of how we're moving, we many times can only get us so far, because we're many times told like, oh, it's a structural issue. And I actually find that to be like rarely the case. Like that's really rare. Usually it's tissue related. And that's the cool thing about fascia is that is tissue, and we can change it. We can improve it. We can improve the function of it and all of that. So kind of fast forward through that, move back to the Midwest to raise my kiddos. And 2018 ended up dealing with molds. And actually, like, it almost derailed me from all the movement stuff I was doing. I mean, I'm grateful that I ended up diving in, and that's when I first found FDN. And I was like, because I wasn't going to rely on like the medical world to heal me, because I remember my one appointment with my doctor, which I loved her. She's great. She was much more, she's like medical, but like holistic. She was also a midwife as well. But of course, my appointment to my doctor, when I was so tired, they're like, oh, well, you need iron. Your iron's low. And this is like, my big message is always like, okay, we have to be our best advocate for our own body. And I knew going through 3 pregnancies, having 3 babies, never once was my iron low. So my body did not tend to have low iron. And I was like, that's a big red flag to me that something really severe is going on. I could barely get out of bed. I could barely function. So long story short, ended up having mold toxicity from our house, our newer house we had been in for like a whopping year. So yeah, I got really, really, really sick with that. And I had, prior to like getting really sick, like I knew something was wrong, and I kept kind of searching. And I was that person who was, really listened to my body. I was really doing everything right. But when you live in a toxic environment, well, that's just going to keep working against you. So that kind of like, I feel like kind of derailed me in a sense from my movement stuff for a while. But ultimately, now that I've come out of that detox, I'm so much healthier, probably because of it, right? So many times the crappy stuff that pushes us to be better, be healthier, be stronger, ultimately, like, even though it's really freaking hard stuff. But now I'm able to, when I help clients and I teach them all my online stuff, I also now have such an even deeper understanding into how the body's connected, which I always say everything in the body is connected, and really have, gone back on the horse with all the movement and the fascia and everything, but now can layer in my FDN work, and I love it. So there's kind of my story there.
I love it. Thanks for sharing all that. I used to do Olympic lifting as well. I was a competitive weightlifter in high school. So,
oh, cool.
Yeah, that really changed my life. So much fun.
Yeah.
With the mold, oh my gosh, did you have to move into a new house after that, or what was that process like for you?
Well, we're back in the house, because you end up with this position of, are you going to sell a moldy house and lose money, or are you going to renovate it and so you can move back into it? And we love this house, we love this land. Like before we were talking about before we got on, right? And I was like, I'm such a nature person, and that's what drew us to this house that we're in. Is we have a pond in front, little creek out back, the trees, so the kids get to have experience in nature. I believe kids need to be outside in nature and not just in the house on technology all the time. Yeah. And so we loved it so much. I was like, we have to figure it out. So we ended up moving out. Actually, moved back in with my parents, because that was the easiest thing to do at the time, because I was so sick. Like I was basically out of commission. I couldn't help with anything. So it was all on like my mom and my husband to deal with everything. I would do it differently now. Looking back, I've learned so much, because there is a lot of fearfulness stuff out there with molds where they make you like, we basically threw away a lot of our stuff. So basically, if you can't clean it, you have to get rid of it. And when I couldn't help with stuff, it was kind of like, what do you do? So basically it was from our roof. That was the bulk of it. Someone had patched the roof. It was a previous owner. I don't know if it was the ones right before us or before that even. They put the lining upside down. So instead of repelling water, it was absorbing water, and it was like a perfect storm. It was right where our dryer vent was, and that corner had come off. Mm-hmm. And so it was like all this hot, humid, moist air from the dryer was going up into the attic, which was then getting wet and then we had a vent right above that. So it was like venting into our master. And I work from my house. This is a master. So like I was the sickest of anyone in my house. And I started noticing too, as my youngest started having headaches, and I was like, that's weird. She doesn't have headaches. And so anyway, we also had stuff in the master bath, but I think that was the bulk of it, is those darn roofs, people, like those leaks. You got to watch for those water leaks. So anyway, we were actually getting our roof redone at the time anyway. And so it was kind of perfect in the fact that we obviously figured it out as soon as we did, because we were like, okay, you guys, you have to take off any underlay of that roof that looks like it has any water damage. It has to go. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it was not fun. I don't wish it upon anybody. But I've learned a lot. So I always hope that maybe it can help others. So that's why I don't mind talking about it a little bit. Like, if you've got water damage, you've got to do something about it. Because like I was having MS symptoms, like things like that. Like if you go over symptoms, a lot of MS and lupus and, like the fibromyalgia type symptoms and stuff can be because of mold. Mold can cause so many neurological issues. Because what it does basically is it turns on, like, I don't know, you should probably talk about epigenetics a little bit on your podcast. I'm sure you have at some point. Yeah.
Yeah.
With genes. Yeah. So it basically can turn on 700, 800 plus genes, which is why people that have mold have just so many symptoms, and then go to their doctor and their doctor's like, well, your lab's pretty normal. Must be all in your head. It's like, no, it's not.
Yeah. I've heard it referred to as like the great mimicker. Because it can mimic any disease, essentially.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Yep, it really can. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. My gosh. Well, thank you for sharing that story, and I'm sure that it'll help other people kind of realize that could be a potential trigger for their health.
Yeah.
But so you've touched on so far. You brought out like the pelvic floor, the deep floor, core, and all that kind of stuff multiple times so far. So can you tell us what is our deep core? And then how do we take care of that?
I love this question. Okay. So many times when we think of movement, fitness, we want to work our abs, right? And so when people use the word core, they're thinking about their abdominals, right? Their rectus abdominals, like six-pack muscles, or maybe their oblique muscles, things like that. So when I refer to, and the reason I say the word deep core, because it kind of gets people thinking, oh, well, what's the deep core? Because if you say core, then it's like just the abs. So our deep core really is everything from the base of our pelvis, which includes our pelvic floor, everything through our torso, basically, like the abdominal wall, which is not just muscles, but also layers of fascia, the deep layers of muscle and fascia that go along our spine, our diaphragm even, right, which is right underneath your rib cage, all those intercostal muscles, and all the fascia, basically. So from the base of the pelvis up underneath our shoulder blades. So it's our entire torso. And so much movement dysfunction comes because we are too bound down in our core or imbalanced, right? Maybe we're rotated one way because we have these tendencies to sit a certain way, or moms have a tendency to like carry a kid on one hip and they jet a hip out. And when our pelvis becomes imbalanced and things like that, it can throw off everything. So, I'll use the example sometimes like back pain, right? So I get deal with a lot of women have back pain, and I've had women who've literally had back pain for over 10 years, and they've been to this specialist, that specialist, what have you. And some of them had surgery with no, and not getting any results and still in pain. And within a couple months of learning my techniques and changing the way they breathe and the way they move and the way they activate their deep core, their pain goes away. Like it blows my mind, even sometimes the testimonials that come out of, my core rehab program that I teach, because it's all about looking at the body from a different perspective. Because if we have back pain, what happens when you go somewhere? A lot of times they look at your back. Well, the back pain, unless it's been a traumatic injury, like a car accident or something, and even then, this only partly, this many times is still the case. We start to get these oppositions that start to happen in the body. So for example, if you've got low back pain and you're not addressing what's going on within the pelvis, the pelvic floor, the front of the hips, the psoas muscle, a lot of people know the psoas is like the muscle that goes from the front of the hip through the back, then we're missing a big part of the picture. And so when I'm really working with my clients, my students, it's all about looking at your body as a whole. We don't compartmentalize and like, oh, we want to fix our back pain and we just focus on our low back. No, we have to look at all the other areas of the body, because so many times where we feel the pain is not actually the area that's causing the pain. It's like a reaction to the body. And neck pain is same too. Like, again, you could have imbalances in your neck, but so many times neck pain is actually from the pelvis. And I know it sounds crazy to a lot of people. But we always start, and everything I teach with my clients, we always start at the pelvis, because if you have a wonky pelvis, most likely you've got pain either up the chain towards your neck or down the chain in your knee or your ankle or your foot or something like that.
Okay. Yeah. It's kind of like the rest of Western medicine. Like,
Yeah.
you come in with a thyroid problem and they want to put you on a thyroid medication or take your thyroid out. It's like, well, that's actually not why the thyroid's not working. It's somewhere way far away from that. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's all connected. Like, and that's what I love about all the FDN, health work that we get to do is I'm like, it's just hand in hand, because that's what I've been doing with movement for all the rest of my career.
Yeah. You mentioned breathing. Is this just like deep belly breathing, or is there something specific that you're teaching people that is activating the core a specific way or helping that?
I love breath. Breath is awesome. Rachel, we could talk for like a couple hours about breath.
Probably.
So breath. So here's the deal. In order to optimally, and that's the word that I like to use, to learn how to optimally activate and strengthen your deep core, including your pelvic floor, regardless of whether you think you have any pelvic floor dysfunction or not, breath plays a role. We can do all the movement in the world and not properly activate our core. It has to start with breath. And so, doing some deep belly breathing deep into our pelvis can be really helpful to learn to release and relax, because believe it or not, a lot of people that have back pain, hip pain, incontinence, right? Peeing their pants, even if it's from time to time, because any of you who are, going for the occasional run or running sometimes or jumping on a trampoline, or you sneeze and you pee your pants a little bit and, another woman tells you, oh, honey, that's normal. It might be quote normal from a society, but we should stop accepting it as normal, because when we start having those problems, I say that's the body's way of communicating with you that we need to start listening and start changing something. And so many times we're actually too tight and restricted through our core, through our pelvic floor, through our hips, that breath can be really helpful for us learning to release and relax. And so learning to breathe. And I know people will say, well, Erica, I don't really breathe. Our breath doesn't go all the way down to our pelvis. I get that. Of course not. But what it does is it causes a relaxation response, right? We talk about the vagus nerve, where when we learn to just be more aware of how we're breathing, and we don't want to force our breath either. We want to just be aware of it. And so one of my first things I always ask my students is just, even right now, while you guys are listening or watching the video, like if you, bring awareness to your breath, so start to breathe in for a second. And notice, does your breath go up and you feel your shoulders rise to your ears? Okay, if that happens, just take note of it. Don't be hard on yourself. Just be like, oh, okay, well, I'm not breathing very deep, am I? So instead, what we want to start doing, and I like to add a visual practice with this, is starting to visualize your breath going deeper down into your body where you want it to go. If you need to start with belly breathing, I'm fine with that. But where I like to encourage people to move to is breathing out to the sides of their rib cage, all the way into their back and into their low back, and all the way down into their pelvis and their pelvic floor. And in the beginning, most people cannot do this because, again, we're so restricted and we're tense that we're like, oh, breath, how do we breathe deeper? So we just have to start practicing and doing it. And this is where movement can be really helpful, because we can use movement to help us facilitate the breath, but also use breath to help us facilitate the movement. And many times when we start moving for movement's sake, and notice I'm using the word movement, not like exercise and fitness, because like how many times, especially as women, have we used fitness and exercises to like beat up our body and be like, we got to burn these calories. We got to do this. We got to do that. Like it's punishment.
Yeah.
Movement is not punishment, ladies. We are moving all the time. And so we need to learn how to move better, how to breathe better for movement's sake. Because we all know, I mean, look at anyone as they age, as soon as their mobility goes down, so does their health. And so many times we don't realize how important this mobility is until we start having problems ourselves. And so that's why, like, when I'm even teaching to 20-year-olds, I'm like, ladies, if you're having dysfunction now, what's 20 years from now going to bring? What's another 40 years from now going to bring? Because I work with those women on the other end of having to have hysterectomies because their, organs start falling out and all of that stuff that can happen. And like, we got to talk about this so we can recognize that there's something we can do about it. And so breath plays such an important role for us to teach our body how to properly activate our pelvic floor and our deep core. And one other thing to understand too is the pelvic floor, while it functions on its own, it optimally functions when we understand its role with breath within the pelvis and how our leg strength and balance, right? You can be really tight and say your right inner thigh, and that's causing major restriction in the right side of your pelvic floor, which can be causing maybe left SI joint pain. And all these years, maybe you've been going after the left SI because that's where you feel the pain. When optimally it's because, we've got some imbalance going on the pelvic floor and the pelvis and the inner thigh. So does that all kind of make sense, kind of putting it all together?
Mm-hmm. Oh, it makes sense to me. But I also understand the way fascia works and everything too, and how it's like strung across the whole body. I think it's so fascinating. And I'll never forget my first fascial massage. I was like, whoa, this is the most amazing thing. And he sat there and explained every piece to me. So it's so important. But let's touch on the pelvic floor a little bit more. What are some ways that someone can strengthen the pelvic floor? And then also, I want to add in here, is there a way to know if you have pelvic floor dysfunction, or are these strengthening techniques, like, should we all just do them?
Yeah. So I would say everybody should do them. So let's talk about when it comes to strengthening the pelvic floor, we have to bring up the word Kegels or Kegels, however you want to pronounce them, because we've all been taught them for years, right? Like, go practice them when you're peeing and stop the flow of urine. And I'm going to tell you, like, please, if you're still doing that, stop doing that, because that can actually lead to bacterial backup in the bladder and UTIs. So we don't want that. No. So yeah, we definitely don't want that. And also too, when you think of a Kegel, the way that it's taught, right? If you're thinking that, like, stopping the flow of urine, well, we're only working the front part of our pelvic floor. And so instead of that, like, a lot of women think our pelvic floor is like the size of a quarter, when in reality, it actually is much bigger. So I always use like my fingers to show a diamond shape. So those of you listening, like, think of right now, if you're sitting, right, if you're even driving, listening to this or whatever, like, if you sit up really tall, your pelvic floor runs from basically your pubic bone back underneath your tailbone and then sits bones to sits bones. Like, that's the entire base of your pelvis, right? Now, the musculature is pretty thin, but there's a lot of fascia, and there's also a lot of fascia above the muscles that's helping to support your organs up, which is really cool. So when we learn how to fascially strengthen our body, we actually are going to give our body more support to hold our organs. And knowing that our pelvic floor isn't just holding our organs up, but our organs are actually being suspended internally. So that's why what I teach works so well. And there's research that backs up, right, that when we're activating and strengthening our pelvic floor, we have to use our entire torso and lengthen through the top of our head. So if you can even just think of right now, just lengthening from the pelvic floor through the top of the head, that right now can help you lead you in the direction of getting a better fascial connection from the pelvic floor and help support your organs internally. And it's also going to help your posture. So that said, when we're thinking of strengthening our pelvic floor, I always tell everyone, put the word Kegels to the side, because your brain instantly goes, oh, I got to engage the front. And we're finding more and more, and this is from me also talking to a lot of fascial experts out there that are pelvic floor, specialists and things like that. And they're like, yeah, they're seeing the same thing that I've seen over these years, is our ladies are too tight. And if you're doing all these Kegels, you're squeezing all the time, we're causing actually a lot more problems. Sometimes it can initially, maybe for some women, maybe it seems beneficial, but I don't find it to be in the long term, because the other piece is, if we're not activating the back portion of the pelvic floor, then we have imbalance. So we might be too tight in the front, which then can cause weakness, counterbalance it. And the other piece is if you go to do a Kegel and you notice yourself squeeze your glutes, you're actually shutting off your pelvic floor. So everybody, just if you think about that right now, if you just want to instantly just do what you think of as a Kegel, see if you squeeze your glutes. So one of the first things you have to do is stop squeezing your glutes when you go to activate your pelvic floor, because you're cheating and you're actually it's not working the pelvic floor at all. So remember I talked about breath and relaxing. So one of the first things we can actually do to strengthen, sounds counterintuitive, but it works, is to actually learn to relax through our pelvic floor. And then when we go to start to activate, we want to think of those four corners very lightly drawing together and then lengthening through the top of our head. Not just the pelvic floor, it's the entire deep core capsule that has to learn to basically activate as one, but it's very light and very gentle. And so most people, when they start to strengthen their pelvic floor, they're overactivating. They're trying to like squeeze their belly in. They end up maybe tucking their butt. Those are two big ones that we have to stop doing, or it just shuts off your pelvic floor and you'll never get the right deep core connection. So we have to work to stop doing those. And they're not going to happen overnight. So don't get frustrated when you're with yourself. If you notice you do those things, it's common. I see it in like 95% of women that come into my program. And so we're always constantly getting people out of that tucked pelvis position, drawing the belly to spine. And so what we have to start thinking about, and I'll use a percentage with my students, is think about engaging 50% of what you typically think you need to, because we have to get out of those squeezy, grippy patterns. So now when you think of that pelvic floor engagement, think about inhale, just first try to release and relax through your pelvis. Then as you exhale, gently draw those 4 points together and lengthen tall, but do it half of what you think you want to. And again, most people will be like, well, Erica, I don't feel anything then. That's okay. We actually have to get in this space of really not feeling things to get our body out of those grippy patterns, to stop the grippiness. And then we start to wake up the deep core. And I have some moves that I teach that are, pretty simple and basic. Like I like a simple pelvic tilt where you basically, get in like a crunch type position, like you're going to do crunches, but you're not going to do them. So you're flat on your back, your knees are bent, feet are flat. And we just do a little pelvic rocking back and forth. And that's a really good position for you to get a lot of feedback on your own body, because we should actually start to use our breath to activate lightly and activate the pelvic floor and help our pelvis rock back and forth versus our glutes. And so many times my clients start doing that and they notice they grip their glutes to move their pelvis. That then tells their brain, because a lot of what we're doing here is training our brain how to reactivate correctly. Then it can tell them, okay, I'm engaging my glutes, so I need to try to stop doing that. How do I do that? Well, we have to release, we have to decrease our range of motion, and we have to activate less, because that's really the biggest thing, especially for people that have like a history of running, high intensity workouts and training. We are just so ingrained to like squeeze and grip and, do all of that.
Yeah. Wow. My whole perspective on squeezing the glutes just changed.
Exactly. And we want to have like strong legs and strong glutes, but we want them strong in a way that supports our pelvis from underneath, not that's tight and tucks our pelvis in and causes it to be so restricted that then we can't move correctly.
Yeah. And I feel like that's what's taught is the wrong thing or the opposite of what you were just saying. Yeah,
it
definitely.
Is. Yeah,
it's
that
crazy.
is what's taught. Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, I never taught the tucked pelvis stuff, but the belly to spine stuff in my early days of teaching, I taught that because that's what we were taught as instructors. But then really quickly I started learning, especially as I started understanding fascia, and fascia likes to be lengthened. So if we're squeezing and everything's going in, well, we're not activating our fascial system. We want to lengthen. And so like, think of it like this, like there's our muscular system, which, are our individual muscles, but fascia connects everything together. So when you actually focus on movement from more of a fascial perspective, you'll actually get more muscularly strong quicker than if you just focus on your muscles, because you connect it all together when we're lengthening, and fascia likes to be lengthened. So it's a really like fun little technique, and you kind of like start thinking about that.
Yeah. Are there other fascial lengthening, like common things that people can do?
Well, one of the easiest one. I mean, everything I teach is always with a lengthened idea behind it, finding space, right? Space in our hip capsules, space for our shoulders, space for all of our vertebrae of our spine. But one of the easiest ones is just that idea of like, just think about lengthening from the pelvis through the top of your head, whether you're standing or you're sitting. And when you do that, you actually notice it's really hard to lengthen and tuck your pelvis at the same time because they fight each other. Like, so just sitting here, like I'm sitting tall, but if I go to tuck my pelvis, then, I shrink, right? We don't want to overcorrect our pelvis either and pull into our low back. So if someone really has a really tight tucked pelvis, you may not be able to get it to unlock for a while. So don't overcorrect and go into your back, but recognize where you are and where you want to go. And in time, you can get there.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is diastasis recti?
Okay. So diastasis recti. So it's common among, we talk about it a lot from pregnancy, having babies, because obviously belly is spreading. So a lot of women tend to get that space. So we think kind of back to the abdominals, right? The six pack muscles. And so that space in the middle, which is called the linea alba, which is all fascia, it spreads apart and stretches. And for, there's a multitude of reasons why a woman might get diastasis more severely during pregnancy. One of those is how she's training her core, right? I'm of the belief we don't need to do specific ab exercises during pregnancy. When we learn how to do the fascial core training, which is what I've been talking about and what I teach in all movements. So even when we're doing a squat, we're still lightly activating and lengthening and getting and tapping into our fascial system. So, genetics can play a role for causing diastasis recti, but one of the biggest ones I find really is not strengthening the deep core correctly and doing inappropriate ab exercises during pregnancy, or getting back to doing ab exercises or other exercises too soon postpartum and not really allowing your body to go through that healing process with the right movement techniques and right breathing techniques. So yes, someone could test themselves at 6, 8, 10 weeks postpartum and be like, I don't have diastasis. I just have that like one finger width space. Like when we test it is normal. That's what we should have. But we also don't want to have a big gaping hole where we can like stick our fingers way down into our abdominal cavity, because that means we don't have good fascial tensegrity helping to support our organs. But if a woman then goes and is like, I don't have diastasis, I'm feeling good, I want to go back and doing my, high intensity training, ab exercises, all that, she can actually cause that diastasis or that linea alba to spread again, even postpartum, because of relaxin in the body. So relaxin in the body is a hormone that women get during pregnancy to allow that laxicity so women can birth a baby, so everything opens. But that stays for a good 6 months postpartum, which is why I get really passionate telling moms, like, you have to learn the proper movement postpartum, which is exactly what I teach. And even if it's been years, you can still learn it. That's fine. But diastasis doesn't just affect moms. It can affect men, and it can affect women who've never had babies. And a lot of times it comes from doing a lot of ab exercises. Like the best example is look up a bodybuilder. You'll see bodybuilders have done a ton of weight training. And if you look at their rectus abdominals, like the six pack, it's not uniform. Like there's space in them. That's diastasis recti, right?
Okay.
But it's just more common with moms, right? And so I had it with my third, and I knew a lot about it. This is the crazy thing. I knew a lot about it for what was there at the time, but what it did for me is it pushed me to go deeper and be like, okay, well, these ways that we're teaching way back when, my youngest is now 10 and a half. So I've been doing this for a long time. And realizing new techniques that we need to be using to help women heal diastasis. So it comes down to, and it's the same really foundation, right? When I work with clients, whether they had a baby, 6 weeks ago, whether it was a vaginal birth, whether it was cesarean, whether they have back pain, or whether they have diastasis, or whether they have no pain and they're like, Erica, I just don't want any of those problems you talk about. So I want to prevent them. But we all start at the foundation. And that's like the deep core stuff that I was talking about. And so many times with diastasis and the societal social media stuff, it's like, there's the focus on just the abs. And I will literally have women come to me. They're like, Erica, I don't care about anything else that you teach. All I want is I want you to help me heal my abs. And I'm like, okay, well, if you want to heal your abs, you need to care about everything else that I teach, because your abs don't function on their own. And so when I'm helping women or men heal diastasis, we're starting internally and working outward. And so, women that have really severe diastasis, we're all women who are like, Erica, I can put my whole fists in my belly. And so I'm like, well, they're not even able to activate at all. There's no fascial integrity because they haven't taught, like their brain hasn't taught their body how to even activate. So I'll get women that have really almost like overdiagnosed diastasis or umbilical hernias because they haven't been taught how to wake up the fascia of their abdominal wall, of their deep core, like through their body, right? It connects everything together. So many times when we just start waking all that up, she'll be like, oh my gosh, my diastasis is starting to heal. And it's like, yes, absolutely. And we may never get that space to go all the way down to 1. But what we can do is we can get women to have what's called a functional diastasis, which is where I'm at. I never got mine back fully to 1, but it doesn't stop me. I do advanced Pilates all the time because you get to a place where the fascia is strong enough to really support your body and make you really strong. That's why we have to sometimes get out of just looking at our muscle system and look at it all together from a fascial perspective and how it's all connected. And so it's really amazing how many women over the years who were told that they had to have surgery to heal their, hernias and or their diastasis recti. And then they go through and re-strengthen their core the correct way, the way I teach them. And they're like, Erica, I didn't need surgery. Like that to me is always such a huge win because in the medical world, it's all surgery, surgery, surgery. And even doctors will say, and even my doctor, I remember asking her, this whole deal with I was like, why do doctors not address diastasis? Like, why don't they think it matters from a function perspective? They're like, oh, she's like, well, because we look at it as it's just a vanity thing. And I'm like, no, if a woman truly has diastasis, she does not have good fascial connection through her abdominal wall, which means she doesn't have as good a support for her intestines and her organs and her spine and her pelvis. And she's more likely to have back pain, hip pain, pelvic floor dysfunction, hernias down the road, digestive issues, which Rachel, I know you know a lot about that, right? So when I work with women who have diastasis, they almost notoriously all have major digestive issues because they're stagnant in their intestines. They're like, the little mom pooch that a lot of moms were like, I want to get rid of my mom pooch. Well, that mom pooch is many times, maybe there's a little fat there. Okay, fine. But many times it's actually our intestines. I know this sounds kind of gross, but sitting there. And so when we can't stimulate and activate the fascia to help improve our digestive system, well, it becomes more stagnant. We have more constipation, which means we're recirculating toxins. Like it's a full circle thing. So digestion plays a huge role in healing diastasis as well as healing the body in general for many reasons, but from a deep core function, because I will find too, my ladies that have any incontinence or pelvic organ prolapse as well, I'm like, we got to really work on your digestion because if you're constipation is the big one, because if women are constipated, right, they're straining more when they have bowel movements. And that can contribute and cause prolapse. So it's a full circle thing. And, I'm always like, ladies, if you're still eating gluten and you've got digestive issues and you've got prolapse, we got to cut the gluten out, 1 for inflammation, but 2 to start getting your digestive system moving. And that's why I teach a stomach massage inside my program because sometimes just that manual work on their stomach can really help to get things moving. So yeah, I really teach it's all connected in so many ways.
It is. Do you tell them to cut out dairy as well? I know that can cause a lot of constipation.
I usually start with the gluten, just because over my 20 years of working with women, when I get them off gluten, we usually start to see. And then if they can do dairy, I always at least try to get them to cut out the bulk of dairy. I'm like, if you're going to keep a little butter, maybe fine. But yeah, I mean, in a perfect world, I'd be like, yeah, cut the gluten, cut the dairy and corn. I'll add corn to that. A lot of my ladies have problems with corn. But yeah, and the dairy in a perfect world. Yes. But I get a lot of pushback. So I'm like, okay, we'll start with one thing. If you're going to start with one thing, my pecking order is gluten first, then dairy and or corn, grains in general, right? Cause a lot of problems. And obviously there's a whole other, right? We know the whole gut problems people can have, but without going too deep, just some of the basics. Those are where I start with people. I can tell you how many women's lives I've helped really improve by just being like, gotta get the gluten out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What about for someone who is pregnant? What is the importance of working out while pregnant? And then if you could explain maybe some differences and things they should and shouldn't be doing. So I already heard you say like ab workouts sounds like a no.
Yeah. No, there's no
Yeah.
reason. There's no reason. Anything you do to like anything you're doing during pregnancy, any exercise is going to activate your deep core when done correctly and effectively, which is exactly what I teach. And so there's so many reasons to stay active during pregnancy. We have a lot of research out there that shows the benefits for you as mom, but also for baby, for brain stimulation. I love the study that came out of Montreal about moms who are active during pregnancy. And no, it doesn't have to be a lot. It really doesn't have to be a lot of activity, a little bit. It's like 150 minutes a week. That's not very much. It's like 30 minutes most days of the week kind of thing. But even if you don't start till your second trimester, we found there's research that is still super, super beneficial for baby's brain development, which like blows my mind, but that's so stinking amazing, as well as your body and how you can feel, right? So with pregnancy, so many times it's like, oh, you just got to suck up the pain of your pants and your back pain. And while we may not be able to get rid of it 100% during pregnancy, like across the board, I would say 90, like I can't say 100% because there's always that one woman that on occasion is like, we try everything and we can't get rid of her back pain or make it better. And sometimes it's the position of baby in the pelvis, and pelvis has to be twisted. But for most women, we're able to either fully get rid of her back pain, prevent back pain, or really, decrease it down to a place where she can move better and just feel better. And we know that stress can really affect baby. So, movement is really good for you when you feel better, you have less stress, all of that. And it's also helping prepare you for the rest of pregnancy. For birth itself, I do a lot of connecting the dots when I work with my pregnant moms, like what you're doing now during pregnancy, learning all this about your deep core. And ladies, I will say pregnancy is the absolute best time to learn all the stuff that I'm teaching you about pelvic floor, about your deep core, about breath, because you have baby inside your belly. So you get this tactile feedback during pregnancy that you will never get any other time in your life. So when I have ladies that are like, I'm just going to wait and work out later and heal my body when I'm done having babies, I'm like, no. That's honestly the worst thing you could ever do for your body. Because your recovery will be so much better. I see it all the time. When I get my pregnant moms moving, and again, it doesn't have to be a lot. Literally, sometimes my moms are like, I feel so sick, so nauseous. I have such low energy, but I want to learn what I can. And she'll even sometimes just do the really simple, slow movements. Like she's barely not even exercising, right? But it's slow, gentle movements. And that can positively affect her birth experience. We see across the board, a lot less tearing with our moms, a lot easier births, which means that her recovery is so much better because she has less tearing. We even have first time moms that don't tear at all. And I'm like, that's amazing. That's so incredible. And part of it, because she's learning how to open up and relax instead of like grip and tight. And when we work against our body and we're so grippy and squeezy, that can contribute to more tearing during birth. And even for my moms that have cesareans, because I get a lot of moms that are like, well, but I'm having a cesarean, so I don't need to do any of this, right? I'm like, no. Our cesarean moms, I love when I get messages. They'll be like 2 weeks. They're like, Erica, I feel so freaking amazing. I didn't need any pain meds. Or maybe they're like, I took one pain med the first day and that was it, because the doctor said, here, you're going to be in a lot of pain. And they're like, I really wasn't in a lot of pain. I feel so good. But you say, okay, I have to wait. I can't get right back into my stuff. So we now in my core rehab program for these moms that are like so antsy to give, I have movement stuff for her to do, but it's not exercise. It's very gentle. It's very breath, deep core focus. So she has something to like, oh, I got a little movement in, but knowing that is really safe for her. It's just amazing. And it's even surprised me over the years. I didn't know. I just kind of like one foot in front of the other as we were developing all of this and just working with more and more women. And I'm just so grateful I get to do this work, because time and time again, we see pregnant women just having so many better experiences. Or we'll have moms that like they're on their third or fifth baby, and it should like stuff should get more painful and all of that afterwards, or with that fifth pregnancy or third pregnancy, and they'll be like, oh my gosh, this is my best pregnancy, I felt more energized. I had less pain. Recovery was better. And I love hearing that because it really goes to show that when you learn so much more about your body, because a lot of what I teach is education. It's not just me telling you do this exercise or do this movement. It's like, no, I really want you to learn more about your body. And when these women really take that into stride, like it's so incredible. They just have such better experiences. And when we don't have the pain and we don't have the dysfunction, like life is just so much better. And then, I mean, having a newborn is hard enough, but then having pain and all of that on top of it makes it even harder. So when we can help just better prepare moms for mom life, it just makes her life so much easier. So if we can do that piece for her, like it's just, I don't know, I get so excited about it.
Yeah. I love it. Did you have that experience with your pregnancies, or did you know all this information when you had your kids? Like, were they better as you kept going?
So I actually, before I even ever thought about becoming a mom back in college, I had actually taken some prenatal exercise training because I was so interested in it. I was just fascinated at what the pregnant body could do. And so I felt like I knew a lot at the time, but I will honestly say through my own experiences and what I was doing helped me realize like, oh, I was really on to something. And I'll use the example of my second. So he was a nuchal cord baby, which I didn't know that at the time. They didn't tell me that, but I remember, so I had my first, and then I'd obviously given labor, I kind of knew what the whole birth was like. And so when all of a sudden I was like dilated to 10 and they're like, okay, you have to push and you have to push him out now. I was like, whoa, what's the rush here? Right? Like give the body some time. And I had him out in 3 pushes. And for a lot of women, that would have been an emergency C-section because they will not, like every time, so the cord is wrapped around his neck. So then every time I would push and have that contraction, his heart rate would plummet. They will not let you do that for very long. And so this is where later, it took me like 6 months for anyone to ever finally tell me how like frightening it was. My husband was a paramedic. And so he knew. He's like over there. He's like, your births are so just like terrifying for him because he's seen so much bad, and so he's checking everything too and trying to keep it together. And my girlfriend who's a nurse and him finally told me, like he was like 6 months old, how bad it really was. And that's when I started to recognize, I was like, well, what have I been doing different than a lot of other moms? And I was also working with pregnant women. And so as I was starting to then dive into more research and things, I was like, oh, this is what's happening. And so when I'm teaching my moms, I teach what's called push prep to help prepare our moms to be more effective pushers. It's a backup plan. Right. Because I always say, because I'll get women that'll be like, but your uterus does the work. I'm like, I get that. Right. Your uterus, yes, is the strongest muscle in your body. It does most of the work. But if we don't know how to push, then we could push for an hour. They wouldn't have let me push for more than a couple more pushes. And they would have, and again, cesarean is not the end of the world. That's fine. Right. Some women plan them. That's totally fine. But for women who want to have a vaginal birth and even natural if possible and no medication, whatever, like I want to help them be able to do that. And again, even if it's a planned cesarean, it's fine. Whatever you choose is fine. But knowing that your body is so much better prepared to go through those situations and heal so much quicker is amazing. And then to answer your question, did each of mine get easier? I wouldn't necessarily say like, that like when I was pregnant with my first, that was probably my easiest pregnancy only because like I didn't have another child to chase after and I wasn't sleep deprived yet. My oldest gave me a run for my money with my sleep. I was so sleep deprived. So with each one, I was definitely more tired. And we know that affects the body for sure. But with my third was a little rough in the fact that I actually had a cyst when I was pregnant with her. So they put me on bed rests or modified bed rests. Like I could go teach clients, but I couldn't actually like do any lifting. I couldn't even walk my kids to the park. The doctor was like, no walking because we need that cyst to go down. So sometimes what can happen if a woman has a cyst and then she gets pregnant, well, those pregnancy hormones can cause that cyst to grow. And many times they'll subside kind of after the first trimester, which mine did. But for the first, I think about half of that, I couldn't work out. I couldn't even walk. It was a torture for me, like absolute torture. And so, but then after that went away, then I was back to, normal stuff. And I think the rest of my pregnancy went fine. Like I said, I'll tell you, like I was so sleep deprived. I have to like really think back. But yeah, we had to evict that child. She was not coming out.
Oh boy.
Yeah, but I'll tell you, I got to experience, and again, I know it was my third, and I know with each baby, you are more likely to have less tearing with each, right? Because you stretched and all that. But going from my first, I had an unnecessary episiotomy, which is when they will cut. They don't do that a lot anymore, but I had an old school doctor. I didn't even know what it was until afterwards. And I was like, why am I in so much pain? Like, I thought that was what birth was. And I was like, I didn't know if I could ever do that again. It was, it was a horrible, absolutely horrible. I was out with that scar tissue for 9 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was horrible. So ladies, no episiotomies unless it's like absolutely medically necessary. Talk to your provider about this. I always they don't do it as much anymore. Like I said, I had an old school doctor. I didn't even know what it was. To then, okay, my third, who was like, it wasn't a rushed experience. It was induced, right? So that was an interesting experience, but yeah, I didn't tear at all. And to have that experience when I was like literally up walking around, like really soon after delivering her, I was like, oh, this is what birth can feel like. Like I got to have these two opposite extremes of being in so much pain from a gnarly episiotomy that I didn't need because she was coming just fine. He was just in a rush. I don't know.
Yeah.
Had a dinner date or something. I have no idea.
Oh my gosh.
But then to my third, to not tear. So having that personal experience, and then obviously all these years of like learning and just understanding more about the pelvic floor and birth itself and teaching this, like women how to open and expand their pelvis and how to relax, like that's huge. And so when we have our moms that have minimal to no tearing, that's what it is. Your recovery can just absolutely be day and night and not slow you up much. So you get to really enjoy that time with baby or with your baby and your other ones that are running around, so it really makes a huge difference. That's why I get so passionate about it all the time, because it's so impactful. And like I said, if women have like unnecessary episiotomies and tearing that we could have potentially prevented such severe tearing, it can stay with them for a long time. That can be injury, which can cause pelvic floor dysfunction on its own. And in the US, we have not very good postnatal care for moms. Great for baby, but unless you're going out searching for a pelvic floor physical therapist or doing the work like I teach, things like that, I always think it's good for women to have, if you can find good is the key word, a good pelvic floor physical therapist that will do some internal like testing on you and feedback and all of that. That can be really helpful for women. But then again, for optimal function, we have to integrate movement. Just doing pelvic floor PT on its own, it can be very beneficial. And again, like I said, I will encourage women to do that. But if we're not integrating all the movement and the biomechanics and breath into it, then we can still be missing a big piece of overall healing of our body. And so, like I said, I know I had scar tissue that bothered me for 9 years. So women listening that maybe you're like, gosh, I had an episiotomy 20 years ago or a C-section 20 or 30 years ago. Yes, that scar tissue can still be causing core dysfunction. And yes, we can do something about it. It's really cool. I love working with moms who've had C-sections and have been like, I've been numb like half of my life with a scar from my cesarean or abdominal or other abdominal surgery. And yes, we can wake that up and stimulate that area of the body through the deep core training. So it's really fun and exciting when we can work with that scar tissue that bodies have.
Yeah, that is all amazing. And I'm so glad we had this conversation because I have not had kids yet. So I'm like taking so many notes over here. I'm like, okay, I have a checklist now of all the things.
Yes.
Yeah. Great. So if you could leave our listeners with just one action that they could take this week that can help them live a healthier, happier life, what would you tell them to do?
I would say be kind to your body and give yourself more grace, because when we actually start to do that, we relax. We start to let go. We start to not hold all the tension in. And so I'm having those conversations all the time with myself. I'm like, we have to learn to work with our body, be kind to our body, stop forcing our body to do the things that we want it to do. Even if it's maybe not ready, it's not quite there yet, because there's something else we've got to learn, or we've got to adjust within our body. So when we start to just be more kind to our body, like it really is such a big key step to improving function. Probably not what you were expecting me to say.
No, but I think it's great. I agree. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat today and share any information you want to give the listeners or where people can find you and reach out if they have questions or they want to work with you or learn more.
Well, thank you so much, Rachel. So ladies, you can find everything that I offer on my website. It's ericaziel.com. My last name is spelled Ziel. And I have a couple freebies on there. So I have one that's how to activate your pelvic floor. So kind of what I was talking about today. I also have like a free prenatal workout. So if you are pregnant and you want to kind of get a taste of what I do teach. And as always, if you have questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. I always love having conversations with my ladies because I feel like so many women are left feeling like, gosh, I just have to deal with this pain or this incontinence or whatever it is. And we just are healing so many women. It's awesome. I love it. So thank you again so much, Rachel.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. That was fun.
Thanks for watching the episode. I really hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, make sure that you like the video and leave a comment and share it with a friend who really needs to hear it. Because when you share this information, you're also going to help other people level up their health. And if you or somebody else you know wants to work on their health and they're looking for a functional medicine practitioner, feel free to reach out to me to apply to work together. Thanks for watching and keep striving to become your healthiest, happiest self.